Joe, you left the corporate world to become a yoga teacher. Most people spend years trying to build a career that you walked away from. What made you leave that career?
So I left that career partly because the job was ending. So the piece of work that I was working on was coming to completion, and so I was made redundant. However, I think I'd reached a point in my career in communications, which is what I was working in, where the level of fulfillment that I had at the beginning was diminishing, and I wanted to do something different. And I think for a long time, I'd been considering whether I was getting fulfillment from the job. And once I started practicing yoga, which I did in 2014 when our son was born, that became a big focus of my life. So I trained as a yoga teacher in 2017, and that was the last year that I was working full time in my previous job, which was head of marketing and communications for a small technology firm. And it was during that time, doing my teacher training, that I was beginning to think maybe this is something that I'd like to do full time because I feel like I get so much fulfillment from it. And I also see in that community, the yoga community, that people are really able to develop resilience, a level of understanding as to what might be happening in their lives. And so through going through that process and then being made redundant, I was left in or with a opportunity to perhaps shift or do something completely different. And that was deciding to become a yoga teacher full time. Yeah.
Amazing. So, when you say an opportunity, could you expand a little bit on that?
Sure. I was told that I was going to be made redundant in around June of 2017. So I knew that at the end of the year, there would be no more work at the company that I was at for me. And initially, I started looking on LinkedIn for other jobs in communications. But whenever I looked on LinkedIn at different jobs, the jobs I was looking at just did not fill me with any kind of sense of excitement or interest, really. And I was applying and I wasn't getting very far with applications. And I think possibly my intention had already started to shift towards wanting to see whether I could do something different, such as teaching yoga. And I really fell in love with practicing yoga, and also through learning to teach yoga, I was beginning to feel that it was something that I wanted to do. And so the opportunity came in the sense that I was given some redundancy pay, so I didn't have to immediately rely on finding a job, although it was, that money was going to run out quite quickly. We had at the time one child, and we still have the kind of overheads that other people have in London. And so I knew that money wasn't going to last forever. But the opportunity came through A, the work ending, but B, having some money to rely on, that I could give my, I guess, full attention to becoming a yoga teacher. So that's what I did.
Okay. And if you look back now, obviously you had that opportunity to make a different choice. What do you think would have happened if you didn't took that opportunity?
I think I would have probably ended up staying in communications. I'd always been relatively purpose driven, and so I'd always chosen to work in organizations that I felt were doing some good for the wider society, or for the environment, or for the planet, for the global society as a whole. So I would like to think that I would have gone in the direction of trying to find a job doing some communications for an organization that I felt resonated with where I was most interested in contributing as a person. So perhaps something to do with the environment, maybe to do with human rights or animal rights. That would, I think, be the direction that I'd gone in. I do some writing on the side of my yoga teaching occasionally, mostly for people that I know and I've worked with. So it's something that I sometimes end up doing, but I'm not actively pursuing jobs in communications anymore. Yeah.
Okay. And you're saying you would have not been necessary yoga. Maybe that would have been left behind. Or do you think you
I
would
don't
have still
know.
been kind of interested in that?
Just to give you a sort of outline of what my career looked like before I became a communicator or a professional communicator, public relations, marketing person. A long time ago, I did all sorts of different jobs. I worked in a number of different factories as a kid. I made Easter eggs, not me personally, the machine made Easter eggs, but I helped to get them along the production line. I worked mopping floors in an automotive company. I worked on a farm at one point, grading potatoes and then moving cows around. They were like dairy cows. I wasn't so keen on that job. It didn't feel that comfortable to me. I also did painting, like lots of kind of odd jobs during my school holidays. Then, because I was competing as an athlete, I studied sports science at HND level, which is a higher national diploma. And then after that, I became a personal trainer. So I worked as a personal trainer for 3 years. During that time, started doing writing for the health club that I was working at, some newsletters and other like small bits of communications, and that's what made me want to go back to university to study communications. But the yoga, I think, came about because I already had a real interest in using the physical body to develop, so through physical training, but also I love the discipline of just returning to and practicing something. So I'd been involved in cycling. I'd also done other sports like squash, quite like badminton. What I love most about sport, I competed as a skier. What I love most about sport was that when you apply yourself consistently and continuously, you can see improvement. And so I really love that. And I think I love that most about the yoga practice. And it's the discipline element, I think, of yoga practice that I really like. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess you believe that, if someone wants to become better at something, do you necessarily believe they have to have some sort of gift to be able to do that? Or would you say discipline itself is good enough so that they can see the results?
I think that's a good question. I think there are clearly some things that we have like a natural aptitude for, but I think discipline and frequency, intensity slightly, also time spent doing something, are the real ingredients of becoming competent, fluid, not professional, but expert at something. And so, I do think that maybe naturally we might have aspects of either our personality or our physicality that might lend towards being good at something. I think really the discipline and the mental application is the way that we will improve. Yeah, and I think that's proven. If you look at athletes that have become very good in their field, they weren't always or immediately the best person doing their particular sport. It's through regular and consistent application that we get better. Yeah.
Very interesting. And why yoga specifically? I mean, you already mentioned that, you were drawn into yoga based on your experience and studies on the PT side and everything else. what else made you or makes you excited to continue teaching yoga? What's behind the desire of, I want to wake up every day and teach 4 classes a day? What keeps you going, I guess?
So I think that the motivation was possibly instilled in me through my parents. They were both teachers, primary school teachers. My mum taught reception mostly, and then she went on later in her career to teach teachers how to work with children with special educational needs. So she was very interested in like developmental psychology. And my dad was the headmaster of a small primary school in Shropshire where I grew up. But above and beyond being teachers, they are still now very interested in creating a better world for children. But they were also hippies when they met, so they were very into the peace movement. Actually, they met. My dad was, I think, helping organise buses to peace marches that my mum was going on. She worked in the library at Keele University, and so they were very interested in peace, in equality, and at home as a young person, I was used to kind of reading different slogans about like root out all racism or ban the bomb. There was always like either a Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, or CND calendar hanging up in our kitchen. And so I think I'd grown up around people who were interested in peace and equality, and environment, and that I think shaped or had some bearing on where I headed in terms of reaching yoga. But my dad also practiced Zen meditation and introduced me to meditation in 2004, 3, around 2004. So when I found and started practicing yoga in 2014, when my son was born, I was already aware through reading some Buddhist philosophy of things like the precepts, which are all very, very similar to the yamas in the yoga system. So they're like a moral code of discipline. And I'd been, I think, probably living in line with those for a few years before I came to the yoga practice. And I started to recognize in my own life that the more, I think, morally decent I was, the more disciplined I was in terms of interrelating with everything else around me, the more comfortable I was feeling in myself. So when I was doing things that were shifty, or I was doing things that I knew were potentially harming someone, it never really sat with me very well. And I don't think you necessarily have to stop having fun completely. But I do think through discipline, we can become more conscientious and more aware of how we might be contributing or how we might be potentially doing something that's damaging. And so when I came to yoga, I was like, oh, this is like, basically this contains so much of what I've been thinking about. And there's also the physical aspect. And the physical aspect for me is about coming up against discomfort, because so many of the postures that you do are physically challenging. And when you're in them, your mind is perhaps talking to you in similar ways that you might experience off the yoga mat, telling you, oh, I can't do this, or it's uncomfortable, like, why are you doing this? And if you can sit with it, you can start to sort of understand, A, things are changing, B, not everything feels satisfactory, and then C, who is this like really happening to? Like, why am I being so sort of like egocentric? And you sort of let go of some of that. Yeah.
So it's quite interesting because you said that you've been living through a specific values that were shown to you from your parents growing up, and you found, you know like a career, which is you're a yoga teacher now, you are doing something that's aligned with the values that you've been taught growing up from your parents, in terms of, the actions you're taking should not be harming others. And would you say that many people live by their values from your observation?
I think that I was extraordinarily fortunate to be brought up by two people who didn't impose a theological ideology on me, or my brother, or my sister. They purposefully didn't introduce us to religion because they wanted us to make our own minds up. So we weren't indoctrinated into any specific system. I think that through experience, what I've come to see is that there are perhaps the majority of people who are told, this is what we believe as a family, this is what our previous generations believed, so this is what you do. And I think that that can affect how people see things philosophically, but also in terms of the expectation, right? Your granddad was a surgeon or a banker or a lawyer, and therefore your dad did that job, and therefore this is what's expected of you because this is what our family do. Like I do see some of that. And so to answer your question, I think that people don't, I don't think they necessarily see that they're being siphoned into doing something that their perhaps parents want them to, or maybe that their parents think society wants of them. And I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing to follow the path of our parents, but it might not be what we want as individuals.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Um, because at the end of the day, whatever our parents say or do, we still have the choice whether we want to follow that pattern or the way of living. I feel like as individuals, we have to make the choice of how do I want to live my life, not how my parents want me to live, not how the society wants me to live. And so, looking back now, was there a moment when you realized success and fulfillment weren't the same thing?
I think there were a number of different moments, and I'll take this back to childhood. When I was young, I competed internationally as a skier. Now I was, again, like extraordinarily fortunate to be able to go and do that, and to have the support of my family to enable me to do that, and all the other people who were part of making that happen. But while I was successful at times, the fulfillment of, or the fulfillment that winning a trophy brought, never felt as significant to me as the fulfillment of developing more like physical control of my body, or like awareness of like how I was moving on the skis. And so in that sense, some people, I think perhaps most athletes, are really focused on the achievement of the metric, which is how many trophies have you won, how many titles
Yes.
have you gained. And you can take that to the workplace, right? Like, what's your job title? What's your salary? Have you won industry awards? And in the workplace, I experienced the same thing. I had some success. I ran for the when I was working in the civil service. I ran a couple of integrated communications campaigns that were award winning. It was brilliant working on them. It was lovely to work with the teams that I worked with. But the award didn't really feel like something that like meant a lot to me. The process of creating or going through the work, I think was the fulfilling part. And there were, there were fulfilling aspects of all the different jobs that I've done. But I feel you can get caught up in the labels that we ascribe to things. And I think that perhaps if you can focus more on finding fulfillment through the actual act of creating something, or being present with what you're doing, then that's where real fulfillment comes. Yeah.
And so, to add to what you just said, you're suggesting it's more important to focus on the journey rather than the actual result. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because by focusing on striving for the goal diminishes the actual joy of doing the act in my opinion as well.
Yes. Yeah. I think it can do. And I think if you're so focused on just achieving something for the sake of achievement, when you achieve it, whatever it might be, you might notice that what you were working towards, or the expectation that you had of what realizing that goal might bring, might not be as it was, or as it was how you imagined it to be. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you think many people are living the life they've consciously chose for themselves?
I think some people are very intentional, very driven, very aware of what they're creating. But I think probably more people have fallen into what they're doing, and then they're probably continuing to do it out of necessity. I think it's really wonderful for people who found something that they're interested in, um, that they can do as a profession. I truly think that's a really wonderful thing, and I think the world is so rich and diverse, opportunities that we have to engage in our area of interest, whatever that might be, are hopefully there for anyone who's looking to do a specific thing. But I do think that there are lots and lots of people who are just doing things out of necessity. I also, again, like, I want to come back to that point of recognizing that I have had the privilege to not be ever in a place where I have just had to keep working in order to survive, right? And I think there's a lot of people who are working one, two, sometimes three jobs just to put food on the table, or keep shelter over their head. And so I think, you know, I have sympathy for people who are in really tricky situations, and when they hear people talking about opportunity, they might see that they've got no opportunity whatsoever. I do think we can all do things differently, but I do think we need to support people who don't have opportunity as well. Yeah.
So do you think that comes down to choices or opportunities?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think it's a mixture of both. Now, I grew up in a place called Telford in Shropshire, and the school I went to, which was called Abraham Darby, the catchment area is mixed. There are some areas that are more affluent, and then there are other areas that are more socially deprived. So a lot of the kids that I went to school with, were I guess, struggling with poverty or families that came from impoverished backgrounds. And for those people, they wouldn't have seen parents doing um, things that were particularly inspiring. They would probably be working in the local factory, maybe working like night shifts, and they were doing just things just to get by. So that is something that situation is something that they were born into purely out of luck. And so I don't see that they would have considered or seen opportunities in the same way that someone who had a bit more stability might see them, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So opportunities, and what about the choices that we are making? Because we could be born with specific opportunities, of course. What is your opinion on choices, life choices? Because every choice we make or we don't make will take us to a different place. What is your take on that?
So I think that our situational factors have a huge bearing on either narrowing the amount of choice that we have or expanding the amount of choice that we have. And I think that, and I believe that everybody, all of us, has the capacity to do good. I think that sometimes we find ourselves in situations where there is pressure to survive, or we have expectations of others that are perhaps narrowing the choice that we might feel we have, because if we know if we choose something, it might upset a whole group of people. So I do think situational factors have a strong bearing on how much choice we have. But I do think that there is an element of free choice. I don't think we have entire utter free will. I think if we did, everyone would be doing whatever they wanted or whatever felt most meaningful to them, and the barriers to doing that would be pretty much non-existent. However, I think the barriers are mostly situational factors.
Yes, and to add to that, why do you think many people, many successful people still feel dissatisfied, restless, disconnected? Would that be based on not living an aligned life? Would that be based on those people believe that, you know, anything that they've achieved is not enough and they're striving for more? What is it that the successful people are consistently looking to strive for more and more and more? What's your own opinion on that?
I think for some people, um, being able to be still, being able to relax, being able to be present and not thinking about what the next 10 things to do are is really difficult, because they have been conditioned to constantly think about producing, to constantly think about attaining, to constantly think about maintaining. Um, and I think there's also a level of comparison that comes in. Like, my achievement might be, I might be satisfied with my achievement for a few moments until I see what someone else has achieved. And then I want even, I want even more. And so I think being able to not be so fixated on ideas of success, or not have our ideas of success associated only with material things, is perhaps a more fulfilling way of experiencing life. Because, you know, as I mentioned before, like you might have achieved the greatest bank balance that anyone has ever achieved, but that is not going to make you exempt from ill health. It's not going to make you exempt from aging, and it's certainly not going to stop you from dying. And I think that the belief that achieving or gaining just for the sake of having and gaining and then holding on to something creates stress in and of itself. There's that stress of like maintenance. Yeah.
To go for the next thing and the
Yeah, or
next
even
thing,
to
and
maintain
it's
what you have, and like it might be your reputation. It might be something physical,
yeah, of
but
course.
it might be your reputation. So there's four ways that we can experience stress as human beings. The first way is that we can't get what we want. So it might be a job title, might be a new car, it might be living in a certain house or postcode. The second thing is that we get what we don't want, and none of us really know what's going to happen in the next moment. So all of a sudden there might be like a tornado or something that like sweeps your car away or knocks your house down. Um, the third reason is that we try to maintain what we have, so we try to hold on really tightly. And then the fourth reason is that we lose what we love. And those stresses or those factors that cause stress are at play the whole time. Yeah,
Moving from one to the other
moving from
consistently.
one to the other consistently. Yeah,
And
yeah.
what's one way to practice to not move from one to the other, to kind of just see the things as they are instead of continue suffering?
So one way that you can practice is, first of all, to recognize that behind those four factors are three mind states. The first being misunderstanding, delusion or ignorance around impermanence. So we think that things are fixed, right? You buy a new pair of trainers, it looks pristine, lovely, and then someone treads on them and they're dirty, right? It rains, you're wearing the wrong footwear, your shoes get wet. Things change all the time. Secondly, attachment. You try to hold on or you try to get what you think is positive or good. Thirdly, aversion. You try and push away what you dislike. The antidote to those things is understanding. So recognizing that things will change. Secondly, generosity, being able to let go. When we can let go and we can keep letting go again and again and again, it's a consistent practice. You can move into the next moment with a lot more grace. You won't be holding on so much. And then with aversion or resistance, sometimes described as anger, you work with, first of all, patience, which is like openness or inclusivity, but you also work with kindness. And I think those things can help you to move through whatever it is that you're going through a lot more gracefully, with a lot more stability, with a lot more relaxation, and a lot more clarity.
In your opinion, how can someone tell the difference between a temporary slump and being fundamentally out of alignment with their life?
I think you, we, us need to have awareness of what's motivating us to do something. And has that motivation come from within, or is it born out of an expectation that we've had, perhaps given to us from someone else? And I think that when we find ourselves in a situation where week in, week out, we're not feeling motivated to get up, to go and return to whatever the project is or whatever the work is that we're expected to do. Um, I think that within a few weeks, probably would recognize or intuitively feel that that is perhaps something that needs to change. Now, it could be that you're just really struggling with a particular project, for example, if you're in a work environment. But I think maybe you found yourself in an industry that's not really doing much for you, and therefore I think it's good to check in at least every 3 months. Am I getting what I wanted to out of this thing? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So it's kind of like checking in internally.
Yeah,
Is this really for me?
yeah,
Or am I doing it for any external
yeah,
reason? And as a result, obviously, I'm not connected to that.
yes,
So I have to really reevaluate, is this the path I want to continue with?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And so I wonder, what's the biggest lie people believe about success, in your opinion?
I think that we are perhaps led to believe that having a certain job title or generating a certain level of income will bring us complete and utter happiness. And I think that neither the label of a job title or an award that you might win, nor the generation of a certain level of money will bring real satisfaction.
It needs to come
I
from
think
within.
I think it needs to come through. I think it needs to come through understanding and an appreciation, and also I think, I think that being grateful for being able to like participate in something, doing something is where satisfaction comes. So like, gratitude, I think, for just being here and having the opportunity to do whatever it is that you're doing with your life. But I think we can get caught up in labels. I think that we can get caught up in goals, and I think that we can get caught up in the ideas that we have about like who we are as people.
Yeah.
And so I think ultimately, if you can move from a place of like being very specific or categorical towards a place where you become more expansive and open, satisfaction becomes a little bit greater, or perhaps it becomes just steadier, and you feel more appreciation for everything, rather than just those things that you think are like the sort of the pinnacle of where you can get to.
Yeah, I also believe, we have to be grateful for being here and have the opportunities to experience things, to create things. And I feel like when we are grateful, we can achieve and attract more of that than when we are focusing on the fact that we don't have those things, because I feel like we as humans can be quite, we can have a lot of resentment and jealousy of thinking, oh, that person has it all because they have this job or this car or that house, or they go on this holiday and that holiday. And you see what's happening on social media. Everyone thinks like, oh, look at them, they've got it all together. But, if I think about if I'm sitting here now and I'm looking at someone who is on a holiday, I don't necessarily think that they may feel much better than I feel now. That's some sort of a internal illusion we tell ourselves, that because someone has that or someone has a specific experience right now, they feel better. But how do we know if they would feel better based on what they have or where they are? It's just an illusion that we create in our minds so that we can continue to grasp and ask for more. And when I have this, I will feel this way. when I buy this, I will feel this way. And it never ends. It just continues. And so how much do you think of our identity shaped by society, family, and expectations rather than our own values? Because obviously we already talked about the way you grow up, and you kind of are sharing your parents' values, which are all great values, of course. But when it comes to, the identity of, being shaped by the society or the families, how much of that is ours and how much is the society?
I think that, of course, there is an expectation that we have of ourselves, or there can be an expectation that we have of ourselves, like, who do I think I am? And we then perhaps behave to an extent in ways that we think we're embodying that view that we have of ourselves. But I think there's also will be a level of us doing things based on what we think society expects of us. I don't know if we can quantify whether we behave more based on what we think the right thing to do, or the right way to portray ourselves based on society's expectations, or our own expectations is. But I think that I would say the more we can recognize that our idea of self is consistently changing, the more we can perhaps let go of the idea that identity has to be like a fixed thing. So all of my past selves will be so different to this self right now. And this self right now will be very different to the self in, like, if I make it in like 30 years time. And you just don't know you don't really know what's going to happen next. So we're consistently, I guess, building new selves. What was the question again?
So, how much of our identity is shaped by society, family,
Yeah.
friends, and how much of that is our choice, I guess?
Okay, right. So I also think. Thanks for clarifying. I also think it depends on the intensity at which family or society is involved, or pressing their ideas of what you should be onto you. So it comes back to that situational factors thing. Like,
Yeah.
what's your situation? If you've grown up in a line of, or a family of, like, bankers, and you're basically being told you're going to go to do the Goldman Sachs graduate scheme because this is what your granddad did and this is what your dad did, then there's probably a strong likelihood that it would be difficult for you to step outside of that. And so therefore society is, or at least your family is, pushing you in that direction. And you might not be able to resist it. So I think it depends on, again, as I said, the intensity of those external factors, and also your own willpower. Like, maybe you just want to cut your own cut your own path, or make your own way.
So, you're saying that even though you could be living, your identity may be shaped by your family and friends or society, you can still make a choice whether you would like to continue that path or whether you would like to create your own identity based on who you are.
Yes.
based on what everyone else wants you to be.
Yes. We do have some choice.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said before, I think that choice for some people is easier to make,
Mm-hmm.
and for some people, it might not feel like there's any choice whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I don't think we have complete and utter free will, because if we did, all of us would choose to be happy. We wouldn't choose to experience hurt, pain, misery, depression. But I don't think that we are, completely autonomous either. I think that we sit somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think there's a level of choice, but perhaps it's not completely free and open to all of us.
Mm.
And it's about working. I think it's about diligently working to try and make the most of the choices that we do have in order
Mm-hmm.
to move towards the place that we might feel like we want to get to.
Mm-hmm. And what would that work look like? If someone hasn't had that open choice
Sure.
as someone else, um, what would that what would those options be, and what would that work look like in your opinion?
I
Where
think
can they start?
I think the work on a day-to-day basis, would look like asking, or first of all, I think being grateful for having this human existence.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, thinking about whether there would be small actions that you could take that day that might be contributing towards some kind of positive outcome for yourself, maybe, but hopefully also for others.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be just to take little steps. And I think really the prerequisite to that is like a kind of a mindful awareness of the fact that you're we are not isolated. We're very much interrelated with everything around us. And so what we do say and what we do has a bearing not only on our own life, but also on the lives of others. And so if we want to live in a way that is fulfilling, harmonious, then we do need to diligently and conscientiously identify what actions I'm going to take,
Mm-hmm.
and how might those play out. So not who will they affect in like my immediate vicinity,
Mm-hmm.
but what are those far and wide implications or consequences. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So mindfulness, I think, first and foremost, and mindfulness in the sense not, sometimes we hear mindfulness in the modern sense, which is to basically observe things as they are without preference or judgment. If we come back to like Buddhist mindfulness, the idea is not that you just view things and observe them and then let them happen. The emphasis in Buddhist mindfulness is to really think about who or what is being affected, and therefore to move diligently towards doing what you know is good or benevolent, and to move away from what you know is harmful. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the practice that I would suggest. If someone doesn't know what they value, I would come back to feeling, like how, when you do something,
Mm-hmm.
how does it make you feel, right? And let's give some crazy examples. Like when you steal something from someone,
Mm-hmm.
how does it make you feel, right? Hopefully, unless you've got like kind of some sort of psychotic tendencies, you're going to feel uncomfortable, because you would know that someone has lost something that they're looking for, or you've been the one that's taken it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're violent towards someone, how does it make you feel? If you're kind towards someone, how does it make you feel?
Mm-hmm.
If some say you're in a playground, or if you're like, I don't know, playing with kids, one kid has got like 10 cars, the other one has got like one car. Sorry, if there's 11 cars, 10 cars, you choose to give 9 to one kid and 1 to the other, how does that make you feel? Like it's an unequal distribution, right? Like what do that, like, come back to feelings, because
Yeah.
I think when you can be really tuned into how you feel, it will be more obvious what your values are. And I think that, like, I'm pretty confident that human beings do have like a real basic level of decency and goodness.
Yeah.
There's a really wonderful author, a Dutch historian called Rutger Bregman. He's written a book called Humankind. He's brought a new book out recently, which is to do with, a little bit like this podcast, finding meaning in the work that you're doing. I forget the name of the book, but he, I think, would say the same as what I've just said. Like, humans basically are decent. We want to do things that contribute to goodness, to want to behave compassionately. We want to behave with understanding, and we want to move from this place of like contraction, separation, towards a place of community as well. Yeah.
And do you think people are not living by their values because they think that they don't have a choice but to live by different values?
Yeah.
So, sorry.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Go ahead.
I think it is extraordinarily difficult. I think it is extraordinarily difficult to live by your values in the system that we're currently living under or within, because what we're rewarded for doing is competing against one another. We're rewarded for taking more and more and more, and we're rewarded for probably doing things that aren't conducive to happiness, freedom, wellness for all. So you do see huge disparity in wealth. You do see huge disparity in the level of freedom that people have. And so I think the system doesn't reward good behavior. And because the system doesn't reward good behavior, even within companies, you might see that people who are more aggressive, people who are more competitive, will naturally get the roles that perhaps other people might want, but just not putting themselves forwards for. So I think it's a systemic problem rather than a problem with individuals. Yeah, yeah.
And obviously, we talk about the system, but who is the system? Because we live on this planet as a collective consciousness, I guess. How did we allow this to happen? Where bad behavior is rewarded, where you have to be a specific type of person to be respected, where if you don't earn enough, where you're not on a specific job title, you're not respected. I mean, how did we get there, really?
I think through a multitude of different things happening. We established organizations, we created states, we devised borders. All of these things are created by human minds. They can be deconstructed, they can be changed. But I think a lot of what we do was born out of a fear. I think the necessity or the believed necessity for control. So separating certain people, and it's about resource as well. So we've created, I think, lots of things, or lots of functions that don't serve everyone as well as they could, and possibly not serving the planet as well as they could either. Yeah.
And 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 what do you believe happens when we ignore that quiet voice telling us something isn't right and we're not living by our values, by the way we feel like we should be living, but yet we're not doing that?
I think when we're not living by our values, when we're not in alignment with, I guess, what we feel intuitively about what's right or what we should be doing, resentment grows. I think resentment possibly for our situation, but resentment maybe for others. From that, perhaps anger. And I don't think anger is necessarily bad. I think we can use it as a motivator for change. But I think that's the consequence. It's resentment and then possibly anger.
Okay. And sorry, I'm just looking at the next
No, that's
question, but the
okay.
next question you kind of already answered.
Okay.
So, what was the hardest? Okay. I wonder what was the hardest part of leaving your old identity behind before you became a yoga teacher?
So I like this question, because more and more I try to let go of my idea of having a fixed identity. More and more I try to understand that my identity is either in a place where it's coming together, assimilating, or it's in a place where it's falling apart. And I think that's the same for every single thing that is in this universe. Like things are coming together, things are falling apart. The thing that I find hardest to let go of, was that in my old job, I occasionally quite liked to wear a suit.
I cannot believe it.
Oh, why would you? It's not particularly comfortable. Like I much prefer wearing clothes that I wear now. But occasionally, I did used to quite like wearing like smart shoes. And so it was a very aesthetic and physical reason. I quite liked wearing those clothes. The rest of the identity was relatively easy to let go of, because I think I didn't I wasn't that strongly identified with it. I think I saw myself, and I think I have always seen myself first and foremost as a person, a human being, before the other labels that I ascribe to myself. So before I call myself a yoga teacher, before I call myself a yoga student, before I call myself like a father, a partner, um, a son, like I come back to that idea of being a person. And I think like if we can do that, it's easier to move from one role to another, but B, it's also to appreciate and to see that as humans, we're not so different, regardless of what our interests are,
What do we,
where we came from geographically, what our interests,
what are we wearing?
what are we wearing? Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. What are we wearing?
I wonder on that part, because you said you really enjoyed wearing a suit.
Not all the time.
Not all the time, but at the time when you enjoyed wearing a suit, what was the sense of feeling you were getting?
I'm quite geeky about clothes, so I quite like the fabrics. I went vegan in 2014 when our son was born. So that meant that any wool that I was wearing or silk, like I got rid of. So
Yeah.
the choice of fabric for me was basically cotton, and then the shoes I wore were like pleather, so like the vegan leather shoes. There are some good vegan leather alternatives now. Clark's did like a desert boot. And there's a brand called Brave Gentleman that were making like quite nice, like smart shoes. But for me, it was like I guess the tailoring aspect of it. Like I'm quite geeky when it comes to clothes. Like I'm probably not smartest looking person, but I quite like
Yeah.
I quite like clothes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe, what advice would you give to someone who feels trapped between security and purpose?
My advice, having experienced this myself, is find security as best you can, but don't let go of what your purpose is. If you have a level of security, it will be a lot more satisfying, comfortable, and less fear inducing to follow your purpose. So I think for most people, security does need to come first. But if you have an opportunity to perhaps do something that is more aligned with you, the way that you want to live, then take a leap of faith. Like, you know, we only live for a short period of time. Everything is changing very quickly. So don't hold yourself back. Don't let fear hold you back. But if you can establish some security, first of all, I would say that. And I say that first and foremost as a father. Like security is important to me. As a yoga teacher, it is very difficult to achieve the same level of financial security or stability that I had when I was doing my previous job. I'm fulfilled so much more by my work than what I was doing previously, but not being able to feel secure financially is something that needs to be considered. And I think if you can create some security, do that first and foremost, but don't lose sight of where you want to get to.
So, would you say by creating an opportunity for someone listening, an opportunity that can help you to create security, that is itself the opportunity that can allow you to take the leap and choose to do something more meaningful?
Yes, it could well be. It could
That
well
could
be.
be also.
It could well be, because it might give you either the financial means, it might grant you the time, or it might give you something else in terms of connections that you can perhaps use to get to where you want to get to. Yeah. So open mind.
Staying open-minded.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if someone listening has built a life that looks successful on the outside but empty on the inside, what steps they can take to move forward, in your opinion?
I would, for someone who has achieved material success or success in terms of reaching a certain career goal, however we're defining that success, but they're not feeling fulfillment, I would say to those people, go back to what interested you when you were a younger person. Like, what motivated you? Like, where did your excitement come from? And just consider, were there factors that took you in a different direction to where you wanted to go? And for some people, it might be that they were being directed into the family business. They might be being directed into the career that their parents perhaps wanted them to have. For others, it might be different factors. But go back and consider, like, think as a younger person, like if I had the opportunity to do my life again, like what direction would I go in? And then say to yourself, oh, that opportunity is here now. Like at any moment, any single one of us can choose to become a different person. We can choose to let go of who we were previously, and we can take a different route. And that's, I think, one of the things that I love about life is that none of us are under the obligation to be the people that we were 5 minutes ago, 5 days ago, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years. If we want to, we can change.
We can change our identity.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today, Joe.
My pleasure. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank
It's
you.
nice to be here.
Thank you.